All right, I am live. I am live. Let me make sure my volume is up. All right, let me make sure my volume is up. Let's see. All right. So you guys come on in, come on in. I pinned the link up at the top if there's anyone that you want to share the link with. And there are, besides tonight, there's part three, part four, part five, and part six. So we still have about four more parts to go on this six-part series. So come on in. I know that people are leaving work. Some people are already home, but they're ready to, just relax and get an opportunity to hear how do you write a book and market it after a pandemic. So if you're here, just tell us where you're from, just drop in the chat where you're from, and also hey Miss Heather, hey, great, had a great Zoom with Miss Heather. um, so if you are in New York, if you're in New Jersey, if you're in Kansas, if you're in Mississippi, just drop where you're from, let us know where you're from and what kind of a book you're writing, so by the time I'm done I'll get a chance to answer some of the questions that you might have. So yes, looking forward to talking with everyone. All right. Well, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Monique Lisa, and I am a writer, director, and producer of stage, film, and books. I am a 45 time nominated playwright, as well as a 26 time awarded writer. And I have had the opportunity and the honor to coach almost 3,000 people in the past 2.5 years. But I have been helping people with their stories since 2008 and earlier than that. And I am excited because I know what it means and I know what it feels like to want to write a book. I know that feeling of wanting to put something together and not know if it's going to be appealing to the people or the audience that I want to reach. So get your pens and papers ready. I'm gonna put my notes here. I always like to make sure that I don't miss anything, but I'm going to put my information nearby me and I want to be able to see everyone. So grab your pen, grab your paper. I got some water here. I'm going to sip some water. Have my water so my throat doesn't dry out. Hey, April, you made it in. I want to make sure my throat doesn't sound scratchy. If it sounds scratchy, let me know because I don't want it to do that. But it sounds like, you see, as soon as I start talking, it sounds like it wants to do that. So let me drink that. So while I'm getting a sip of water, guys, please put your information in the chat, where you're from, and what is it that you want to write. Let me get some water while we do that, okay? I like to have mint leaves and lime and cucumber in my water to kind of help keep my vocal cords clean. So if at any time I have to stop, don't mind me if I have to stop. I just have to drink some water. But welcome everyone. This is how to write a book and market it after a pandemic. So this is a 6-part series, and if you have not taken the opportunity to grab the replays, that which gives you an opportunity to have access to all 6 parts without any complication. You have lifetime access for $37. You cannot beat that. All of these are going to be about an hour. So 6 hours of learning how to write a book and being able to interact with people. And also the chat. We have people that are in the chat just leaving comments. So if you have a question, please put it inside of the chat and I will answer it before we are done. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We ended off with chapter 1, how important chapter 1 is, the overview, the big picture. We talked about the breakdown of what that really means. And it's important as we go through the chapters to know what each one represents and what it's going to do and help with this, what it's going to do for the story and help with. So we're going to be talking about chapter 2 and chapter 3 and how important they are and what the responsibility of those chapters are within the story that you're writing. So let me tell you what this is. This is an opportunity for you to get the inside information step by step on how to write a book, like no holds barred. I'm just giving you some of the things that I know work for me and all of the authors that I've worked with. What it's not is a quick get rich scheme, how to throw a book together and just throw it out into the market. That is not what this is. This is real important for you. If you're telling your personal story, if you're writing someone else's biography, if you're writing a novel, if you're writing a self-help book. And the reason why self-help book falls really well in this is because you do have to talk about case studies. You do have to put your own personal information in there. So it's real important. Hey, Lakeisha. Hey, Queen Patty. And Heather's here. Everybody's coming on in. I'm so excited. So today we're going to be talking about chapter 2. So chapter 2 is going to pick up where chapter 1 left off. Remember that big overview, that ushering in of information, that big story idea. So chapter 2, let's talk about that. So chapter 2 is your time to expand on what you have built on in chapter 1. Now you're going to be introducing more of your characters. And the reason why that's important, excuse me, the reason why that's important is because you want your audience to start to take that deep dive with you. You want to complicate things in chapter 2. You don't want to keep it easy and nice and friendly. You want to start to complicate things right away because you got the overview already. You went through chapter 1, you gave people the big picture of what's happening. It's almost like, somewhat of a preview. But now in chapter 2, you want to rush in and complicate things. You want to start to cause some confusion. You want to start leaving some tidbits about what's happening. And let's use autobiographical. Let's use an autobiographical story. So let's say you're doing your life story and you start at age 7. And at age 7, something really bad happened, but you didn't give it all away in chapter 1. So chapter 2 is now the time to start to unfold that. What complications did you run into? What bad things happened? Who was responsible? Even if you don't want to give away who the person is, you know that someone's responsible for some of the things that have happened. So chapter 2 has a lot of, I like to say it has a lot of meat to it. And I'm going to put this thing here so I can make sure I can see my notes. It has a lot of meat to it, but it also has a very, very important role in the overall story. So you want to incite incidents. You want to talk about things that have happened. And when you talk about things that have happened, it makes it easier for the reader to follow the story. So let's say you want to talk about or go back in time. Let's say go back in time. So maybe you're telling the story to someone. And so if you think about a mystery, they always talk about retracing your footsteps. So in chapter 2, you can start to do a little bit of retrace, a little bit of a retrace. You can do tracking. You can do it's like, let's say you have a pot of boiling water. Now you can turn up the heat a little bit more. You have the water there. Your water is chapter 1. It's the big view. There's a pot. Now, chapter 2, you're going to start to turn up the heat so that things start to boil. So you want to start up more action. If it's an action movie, you want to start to get into more of the action. If let's say you want to set everything in motion, this is where chapter 2 is responsible for. You want to start to put things in motion. And the reason why you don't want to go too slow, and let me tell you this, when you go too slow, you're going to lose the reader. If you go too slow, some people are like, oh, I want to build up and I want to give them some, I want to give them some time to get into the story. Well, you don't want to lose them. So now you're turning up the heat. Incite a riot. Maybe go back and start telling about something that happened that connects to where you're going. Maybe you want to, you want to think about how you can expand the story because you want to keep the reader interested. You want to keep them involved, and you want to keep them talking to other people about this amazing story that you wrote. So not only do you want your reader to keep it to themselves, you want them to start sharing with other people. Oh, I'm reading this book, and you got to read this book. So you want that kind of conversation happening. You don't want to forget that your audience is not necessarily just reading it for themselves, but they will be your best word of mouth. So if your book is really good and they're only in chapter 2 and they're bragging about how great it is, they're going to tell other people who are now going to seek out that book. So think about the responsibility that chapter 2 holds, and that is to almost like a web hook, like it's going to hook to chapter 1 and now really shake things up. It's really going to move things, right? So let's see. Let's say you're talking about you're writing a book about an adventure. So in the adventure, now you want to make sure that you're creating these little pockets of things, and you're actually creating an arc. Think about an arc. So you're building. Every chapter should have a build, and people don't realize this. This is what makes good books good. You want to build, you want to go to the climax, and then you want to have your resolve. People do that like this in a book. Chapter 1, they build. Chapter 2, they build. Chapter 3, they build. And what they don't understand is that if you don't have little arcs in between while you're building, you lose people. That's, let me tell you something. That has been everything in my writing, where I give a little bit of an arc. I give a build and then I come down, and I give more of a build and then I come down, because I'm just drawing you in with the information. Um, Patty, you're saying, is there more questions in chapter 2? Chapter 2 is depending on, and it depends on the type of book that you're writing, but chapter 2 is really pulling everybody from the information that you shared in chapter 1. So chapter 2 is now your opportunity to start pulling things in and making them bigger. It's a time to exaggerate. It's a time to start to, like I said, that pot of boiling water. It's time to turn up the flame, because you want small bills, but you still want to have this whole story connected and interesting. So you want to create answers to the unknown, or you want to create some mystery, or you want to create some trouble, some problems. So it's not a time to be sterile. Yes, more details. It's not a time to be sterile. Chapter 2 is not a time for you to take a seat back and kind of wait and say, okay, well, by the time I get to chapter 5, I'll really give it to them. No, that's not what you want. You want to start doing that in chapter 2. And that's why there are books that when you pick it up, you can't put it down. And the reason why you can't put it down is because it gets you in the beginning. And in the beginning, there's such a build. You've got these little things happening and there's such a build, and you want to keep that momentum. So that's why chapter 2 is important, because not only have you divulged some of the things that are happening with that big overview, now you're taking some deep dive into these pockets, so yes, so more details. And it's not, don't look at it as small details. You can make it big. You can like hit your reader hard with confusion. You can hit them hard with, pandemonium. You can hit them hard. You can hit them hard, because remember, once you do that, you've got other chapters to kind of fix those things, like some resolve, some things that are going to help to bring the story back from chaotic to home. And you can do that with anything, even a manual. With the manual, you wouldn't have action and drama and all of that, but in a manual, you can just have some real life stories in there. Let's say you're doing a manual that's talking about candle making. Talk about the ingredients, talk about the materials, talk about where you can get your supplies from. But then you can also talk about the fact that you made a candle mixture and it didn't go well. Why? Because something broke. You put too much of something in it. There wasn't enough of a scent. You can make your stories interesting, and you make your books interesting without it necessarily being a fictional, non-fictional action. You can still make your story interesting and put humor in it, put case studies in it. You can make it so that people want to read what you write. That is so important, because what's going to happen is you're going to find your audience. And when you find your audience, you're going to find that they are more interested in you and your story than just overall just the book on the topic. They're going to be buying into you, and you don't want to lose them. So you want to put in those answers. You want to create the unknown, and you want to create questions. You want to put questions in the mind of the reader or the writer. You want them to kind of think, okay, where are they going with this? I'm trying to follow this. Where are they going? Because I feel like I'm going to be on a roller coaster. I feel like I'm going to be on an adventure. I feel like I'm going to be running through the jungle, like almost like a scene from Jumanji with Kevin Hart. You want it to be a thing where they want to hang on every word that you say. So you want to hint to building tension. You want to you know, you want to make sure that from the end of chapter 1 that you're building some tension in there, making sure that you have pulled the end part of what happened in chapter 1 into chapter 2 and build on it, make it big. You want to bring some mystery in there. So chapter 2, you can bring some mystery in there. Let's say a mysterious letter arrives, or someone's missing, they were kidnapped, or you want to start to broaden the story, and you want to begin to compile all of the ideas. You want to bring in other characters. That's going to be important. You want to introduce other characters in chapter 2 to open up the story. Because if you're just starting off with, you're writing in first person, you're just starting off with one character in chapter 2, you want to start to introduce more characters, more backstories, more interesting things that are happening with the characters. And then you want to also start to expand the story now, because if you're writing, you don't have to have one story. You can have sub stories, or subplots, we call them. You can have subplots that are going to help you to start to build on the story. So we're going to talk about that. And then also, um, I wanted to look at some of the things that should happen in chapter 2 that can also spill over into chapter 3. So let's go back to chapter 1. So chapter 1, we're inciting an incident. We're telling the big overview. We are getting into the story. But chapter 2, we're developing the hook that we created with chapter 1. So the hook from chapter 1, you're pulling in that hook into chapter 2. But now you have the responsibility now to watch how you're formulating your story and making sure that you're cohesive from chapter 1 to chapter 2. You're cohesive. Chapter 2, things are getting bigger. More details. Bad things start to happen to the good guys. Good things start to happen to the bad guys. I mean, however you want to do it, but you have to give and bring in more detail. So make sure that you are clear on that, that's what you're doing, right? So you start to expound on the complication, and then you're building a character arc. You're building out the arc of the story for your characters, and that's really important. And if you want to know what the arc is, the story arc, that's your plot. That's what's happening throughout the whole story. So the plot of the story is your arc. The arc is the plot of your story. That's your whole build. Very, very important. And you guys, if you're following me, put something in the chat. I want to see if you have any questions, if you're following me, because every now and then I'm going to peek down and make sure that I'm answering your questions, because it's really important, not just for me to give you this information, but if something comes to your mind and you need to have an answer, put it in the chat and I'll be checking it. So we have the arc. And I'm going to check off my notes. I don't want to forget anything. So we have the arc, which is the plot of the story, and it's also the narrative of the story. It's the narrative, and it's the rising peak, and we call it the build. So it's the rising peak, and that's important. And the peak is also the climax. So you are going, and so you can't miss a piece, or you can't miss a part from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3. You got to make sure you're building and building. You don't want any drop off. You don't want any dip. You want to make sure that everything that you're doing, that you're following the arc. And following the arc just means that you are taking your reader on an adventure, and they are excited and they're drawn into what you're saying, and they really, really want to understand where it is that you're going. And you don't want to leave those gaps and those pockets like I talked about before. Some people do that. They start off really good and then they drop off because it's like, oh, I don't want to give too much. I don't want to give too much too soon. No, 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 no. Cross that out. Cross that out. You want to give a lot. You want to give your main story. You want to give your subplot. You want to build that arc. You want to add more detail. You want to bring in the drama. You want to bring in the excitement. You want to make sure somebody's missing. Somebody got kidnapped. Someone is bringing up things from their past. There's someone looking. Bring it in. Bring it in, because by the time you get to chapter 3, you're going to have to dig through that stuff, and and that's what makes the stories interesting and exciting. That's what makes movies interesting and exciting. It's that you almost feel like you can't catch your breath. You feel like that you're just going on this ride. You're going on this ride with the intention of finding out what is really happening, right? So we have an incredible responsibility in chapter 2 to make sure that we make a mess. Isn't that like an oxymoron? We want to make sure we start to make a mess or we start to reveal a mess. We start to reveal a whole bunch of stuff is happening. And you want to make sure that as you're doing that, you're paying attention to where you are in the story. So we have these incredibly important short stories within the story. We have these subplots, we have these things happening, right? And then we have the falling action. So the falling action is you built the person up, you built the story up in the middle, and then you let it fall. You're going up and then you're going to go down. And so those are the little subplots, those little arcs in between. And that's what makes stories really interesting. And I would like to compare that to soap operas. Soap operas have been around for years. Many of us have been subjected to the Young and the Restless and all those other, General Hospital and all those other shows. How do they, within 30 minutes, do all of that? How do they bring you all the way up and then bring you all the way down? Because they're doing it in pieces. They're doing it in pieces. They're really, really doing it. And that's an art, to be able to bring the big picture in, build up the drama, hit the climax, go towards a resolution, and then have the conclusion. That's an art. And if you can do that in your book and have your sub stories, your subplots in between, you will become an incredible writer. If it's your life story, think about amazing things that have happened to you, and think about those times where you really hit that brick wall and you really were, down there, you were having some challenges, and how to tell that story. You don't want to tell it like it's commentary. You want to make sure that you have some texture in there. You want to make sure that the way that you're telling the story, that you're bringing it up, you're opening it up, you're turning up that flame underneath that pot, right? And so there's different kinds of story arcs. And I'll tell you what that means. We have the rags to riches story. So the rags to riches story, that's a common story. That's like little orphan Annie. Annie, she gets adopted by this rich daddy Warbucks. She gets adopted by him, and then after she gets adopted by him, she goes through all of this drama. She goes through drama before he adopts her, but then after that, you've got the parents who are looking for her, who are not really her parents. So that's the rags to riches story arc, where she goes through all this tumultuous stuff, and the bottom line is that the family that claims that she belongs to them, that's not her family. So, and then we also have Cinderella. Cinderella's another story. Cinderella is same thing. It's sort of a rags to riches, where she's doing well with her family, then the mother dies, and then the stepmother comes in, and the whole thing. So that's a rag to riches story. Then you've got the adventure. The adventure would be like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's, even though it's Narnia, it's a crazy adventure, it's got all of these twists and all of these turns in it. So that's like, that voyage adventure arc. So that's a different kind. And then you've got the comedy. You've got the humor. There was a movie out. I think I just saw one, Tower Heist, with Eddie Murphy and Ben Stiller and a couple of other people. So it had comedy, it had action, it had they had the humor, but it also had some of the drama. So that's another type of story arc. So it's so when you look at the arc, you look at where it fits in, you look at where it goes, and so decide if you're going to do something autobiographical. Are you leaning towards humor? Are you leaning towards drama? Are you leaning towards mystery? What is the story that you're telling? What genre does it fit under, and what kind of a story arc can you build? And then also there's the tragedy. Tragedy is one of the it's not difficult to write, but it is something that you have to kind of really think about that story. One in particular, you can see the Passion of the Christ. That was a huge build. That tragedy. We knew the story, but the way it was done by Mel Gibson, it was you could feel that. What's his name? Jim Caviezel, who played Christ. That was a tragedy story, even though it was supposed to be triumphant, and it was. Look at all he went through. So the build of the 40 stripes on his back, and how the pieces of material was ripping his skin off. That was tragedy. So that was a story arc based on tragedy. So you want to Learn what the rules are for an arc, learn what they are, and then learn how to break them. Learn how to break the rules. Follow the rules, but then learn how to break it and learn how to come back in, because you don't want your story to be like everyone else's, but you want to kind of have a guide. You want to have a guide of where to go. So the best way to do that is write, read it, feel it out, and if you don't like it, push it to the side. I tell people all the time, do not throw away your work. Just put it to the side, because you never know when you can go back and cherry pick that information, pull out the parts that fit for the new piece that you're working on, right? And I'm checking out the chat. You guys, if you have any questions before I go to my next section, which is talking about the setup and the payoff. We're going to be talking about the setup and the payoff. And the reason why we're talking about that is between chapters 1, 2, and 3, you are setting something up, but you also have to remember there's a payoff. The payoff is your resolve. It is you coming to that place where all that the lead character has worked for, whether it's autobiographical or however you're setting it up under what genre, there has to be a setup. So all of 1, 2, 3, even 4 is the setup. And then 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on if you go all the way to 10 or 12, is the payoff. So you've got to have that nice build. You've got to have that nice climb, right? So you want to make sure that you're giving your readers a satisfying story that they can sink their teeth into and that they feel well fed. If they don't feel well fed, they're not going to read into the next set of chapters, right? They're going to kind of, let's say, they might skip around. You never want anyone to skip around. You want them to read everything. So you want to make them feel well served and satisfied with the information that you are sharing within your story, right? Right. So this goes for autobiographies, biographies, nonfiction, and fiction. You want to make sure that the story is following in a way, it's following suit in a way where that build is all you're thinking about. All you're thinking about is, how do I build this story? How do I build it so that the reader is engaged and I'm still telling the story that I want to tell? I'm not shortchanging the reader. I'm not shortchanging how I'm writing, and I'm not shortchanging the process, but I am doing my build, right? So I want to see you guys put in the chat, I'm doing my build. Hopefully that is bad English. I want that to be bad English, but I'm doing my build. I'm doing the work that I need to do to build. I want to see you write that in the chat. That's real important to remember, to build, because as you build, you're allowing the reader to go on this journey with you. And as they go on the journey with you, you're not going to leave them hanging, right? So you guys, yeah, put that in the chat. I'm going to get some water. Put that in the chat. I'm doing my build. I'm doing my build. Build, 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 right? And even for children's books, we have Miros here. Miros has written 5 books, and Patty is working on a book, and April has finished her book. And you're doing the work that you need to do to build. So let's talk about this. So we've talked about the structure, and we talked about how our chapters need to be intriguing. The chapters need to have the information in it that's necessary, right? So with chapter 2, like chapter 1, we're talking about structure and what that looks like. But let's talk about chapter 3. You guys ready to get into chapter 3? Put a 3 in the chat. Put a number 3 in the chat. We're about to jump into chapter 3. Yes, Lakeisha, I'm doing my build. I'm doing my build. All right, so we're going to talk about chapter 3 and why chapter 3 is very important. Well, with chapter 3, let's talk about this. You're going to start to fill in your characters' backstories. You're going to start building up who they are. Excuse me. You're going to start filling in and putting information in that helps your audience to find out who they are. You're going to start introducing more characters in chapter 3 as well. Your chapter 3 is going to start to unfold with more characters, more drama, and you're going to make sure that you're starting to fill. It's almost like the grout in between the bricks. If you've ever seen bricks, you can't just put bricks down and not put grout or put the cement in between it. And that's what chapter 2 and chapter 3 are. They're bricks, and you're going to start to put that cement in the middle, because 4, 5, and 6 is coming. And if 4, 5, 6 is coming, you got to make sure that that foundation, 1, 2, and 3, is strong. Again, 1, the overview. Or 1 is the overview, the big bird's eye view. 2, you're coming in and you're starting to bring in some drama. You're starting to bring in some stories. You're starting to unfold things. 3, you're going to start filling in the gap. And here we go. Look, here we go. You're going to fill in those gaps. And the reason why chapter 3 is really, really important is because you're going to be talking about the main setting, right? You're talking about the main setting. The main setting is what is happening in this story and where is it happening. You don't want to leave the story without people understanding where you are, right? Before we talked about environment and location. Well, now you're going to reveal environment and location. And especially if you have someone who's running away from someone, you definitely want to reveal where this is happening. Let's just say someone is in Florida and they're escaping to California. You want to talk about that. So we're revealing the main setting, where your characters are, or where you grew up, or wherever the story is, and where it's going. So the main setting is very important, and we want to make sure that we are talking about not just the story, but the history, right? The history. So what's happening in the history of the story? So you're unfolding this stuff. You're unfolding it, and you're doing it in a way where you're not giving away too much, but you are giving people a peek, that bird's eye view. You're letting them in. You're not giving it all away. Chapter 3 is not about giving it all away, because it is not your climax yet. Remember, it is a slow build. You can do little arcs within the story, almost like a soap opera type format, but you are making sure you are climbing, right? So you're going to create new tension and new drama. So in chapter 3, new tension, new drama. All right, you've already started to kind of pull that tension and that drama in. Remember, that pot it hasn't started boiling yet, but now it's going to start to boil. So you're really turning up the flame now in chapter 3. So new tension, new drama, new situations, new unfolding, and the environment, right? Okay. So you want to make sure that you're sharing relevant details to the story. In chapter 3, you can start to say that Mary lives in the Bronx, and this is what happened. You can start to unfold that main environment, that main space that the story lives in. Where people like to say USA anywhere, but it's not USA. Now you got to be more specific. Where are you? And you can do that without actually saying it, but start to talk about the surroundings, start to talk about the things that are happening, start to really unfold things, because people want to know where this setting is at and why is it here. And you could do that without saying it, but just showing it. Talk about the things. If you say something that has to do with New York City, and then you mention the Empire State Building, people are going to know you're in New York City. If you're in Paris and you start talking about maybe an area where you can see the Eiffel Tower, they know they're in Paris. So you have to really start to unfold the main setting. You have to share that with your audience and let them know that this is where the story is taking place. And now the tension is rising. There's more strategy. There's more drama. There's more unfolding. You gotta get to that place. Every chapter should be an exciting adventure for the reader. So if you're with me and you understand that, drop a 2 in the chat. Drop a 2 in the chat. You gotta let that main setting become centerpiece now. Because you want to keep 1 and 2 connected to 3. So drop a 2 in there if you understand. Let the main setting be part of what the build is for chapter 3. And then as you unfold these relevant details of what's happening in your main character and in the story, you also want to reveal secondary story. So secondary story is also a subplot. Secondary story is also the things that are happening with other people. So you want to reveal that in 3. You want to usher in some more characters. Maybe, one of the ladies who lived in a building, she had a run-in with the janitor. The janitor is another story. Maybe the landlord, that's another person in the story. So you want to start to reveal who's in the story. You're in the main setting, but you want to reveal who's in the story. And then now, if it's mystery, now you're giving a little peek into, okay, well, who really did it? Who's responsible for this? So you're revealing and unfolding, revealing and unfolding, revealing and unfolding. You guys drop that in the chat. Revealing and unfolding, revealing and unfolding, because you're doing it almost like a flower. If you have a flower, you start to pull back the petals, you pull them back, revealing and unfolding and building, ushering in that intense drama. You're ushering in that emotion, you're ushering in these things so that story still stays interesting and exciting, and helps people to hold on. And you can do this with your own story. A lot of people think that their own story is not interesting. That is not true. If you build it in the way that I'm showing you and I'm teaching you and I'm sharing with you, you will be able to make your own story even more interesting. You'll read and go, oh my goodness gracious, I had an amazing, I had an amazing life. I can't wait to work with April and her story. But you will draw your audience and keep them interested in anticipating it. So relevant details on the main character, and then also developing the secondary story, very important. And you now are going to have what they call the deeper complexity of the story. So the deeper complexity of the story is now you're really, this is going to be major for the story. So we may have been a little bit surface in one, just that big overview. We may have started to take a little bit of a deep dive in two, but three, we're really pulling it in a deeper complexity, a deeper talk, shout, hurrah, we're getting ready to go in, and we're going to go in. So we're going to pull out a new point of view. So a new point of view in revealed in chapter 3 may be a pivot. Let's talk about a pivot. So you can, as you're unfolding with your main character, you can pivot. And that pivot is going to seem strange to your audience only because they're going to be a little bit curious about what happened. So let's say you're telling your own story as a child, right? And everything is going fine, but you're building this story and everything is going fine. And then something happens. That's a pivot. Something happens that changes your life forever. That's a pivot. Your parents get divorced and then now you have to move. That's a pivot. You get hurt in some situation and it changes your life forever. That's a pivot. So this is where there's more complexity that's added to the story, more complexity and more layers. You're still working on that arc. You're still showing out with the main setting. You're still talking about things that are happening, but now you're amping it up and you're adding some complexity to the story. So let's say someone stole your bike. I just imagine Muhammad Ali the first time he got into a fight, and he didn't plan to get into a fight, but he was good at fighting. So that changed his life. That added an extra layer of complexity because when you think about a fight, most people don't want to fight. But if you fight someone and you like it, now you're like, oh, shoot, I'm good at this. So you add that layer of complexity. You start to really reveal that things are changing. There's a shift. So chapter 3 is really exposing that main setting, bringing in some more complexity, and then having all the rules to building an arc and then changing them. April said she loves to fight. Yeah, we've seen you in some fight scenes, so this is good. So we want to add to that complexity. So before you get to chapter 4, chapter 3 is going to change the pace. Write that in the chat. Change the pace. Chapter 3 changes the pace. And the reason why it changes the pace is because now you are not only building more towards that arc and going up towards the complexity of the story and going up to the climax, you're changing the pace. Change the pace. Write that in the chat. Change the pace. And it's important for us to do that. This is what keeps the story cohesive. So for let's say, I'm trying to think of one of the stories that I read. Okay, so here's an example of changing the pace. Let's say a small child, the parent gets divorced, and now the daughter is living with the mother. Things aren't that great. She doesn't have a lot of money, but now this is going to be her first summer going away to stay with her dad. Now we've changed the pace because now she's going to have a whole different set of adventures being with her dad, right? So changing the pace is important. You're adding layers of complexity, you're changing it, and your main setting. You want to make sure those things are good. So chapter 1, again, big picture. Chapter 2, we're introducing what's happening and we're expounding on the story a little bit more. Chapter 3 is the start to incite the drama, give more information, talk about the main setting, and pull all of that information together. I think the reason why chapter 3 is slow for some people, it's because they're afraid to give away too much. You can't give away too much in chapter 3. What you're actually doing is cementing in the minds of your audience that your story is worth reading. If you slow down chapter 3, then you have to try to amp up chapter 4. But if you don't do that and you really build with chapter 3 and you really add to the complexity, you really expound on the story, you really make a big deal out of the setting, you really show those layers and those textures, what's going to happen is in chapter 4, it's not going to be a hard sell for you to go full sale, because next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about chapter 4, 5, and 6. We're going to be building on some elements that are really important for 4, 5, and 6. And with that, and let me get some water. With that, you want to make sure that chapter 3 is fire, right? You want to make sure chapter 3 is fire. You want to make sure that it's strong and that it's good and that it is holding the attention of your audience. And the reason why I say that is because if you drop off at chapter 3, it's going to be very hard to really pull your audience in. Or chapter 4, you may lose them, and you may lose them for good. And if you lose them for good, what's going to happen is they're not going to finish the book. And I want you guys to drop in the chat, my book will be read cover to cover. So just put cover to cover, cover to cover, cover to cover. My throat is a little dry today. I've been talking all day. Cover to cover. My book will be read cover to cover. Put cover to cover in the chat. That's important. Cover to cover, because we want to make sure that these stories are so interesting, so intriguing. I don't care if you're writing a cookbook, make those recipes so delicious and talk about the first time you made the recipe, or the first time you saw the recipe being made, or the first time you got a chance to taste the recipe. You want to pull people in and you want them to read cover to cover. If you do it right and you write a dictionary, people will read the dictionary, your own special words that you created, if you make it interesting. So we want to make sure that chapter 3, that we incite the drama, we give more info, we introduce more of the story, we introduce more of the characters. If we have any subplots that we make sure that the subplot is also building its own arc. That's important, because you don't want to just throw stories in there. I know people who they try to put fillers in. Your audience knows when you're just throwing a filler in. Your audience knows, and you want to respect your audience. You want to respect the people who you feel are drawn to your story. You want to respect that. And so you don't want to just put fillers in. And that's why I'm not saying that people who use Chat GPT or any of those other open AI platforms where they write stories for you. I'm just saying that you want to respect the intelligence of the audience that you're trying to reach. You don't want to just throw stuff in there, and you don't want to just assume that they won't know. Really think about your story. Really think about the characters. Really think about the story that you want to tell. Don't do yourself a disservice or do the story that you're writing a disservice. Think about it. If you're writing a children's book, think about the child. Look at the face of the children that you want to read this book to and write this book for, and don't do them a disservice by just throwing things together. You can write a really good book. That's why I really wanted to do this series called How to Write a Book and Market It After a Pandemic. We're going to be talking about marketing the book. We're going to be talking about how to market the book. We're going to be talking about where to market the book. We're going to be talking about how and why, but in a way where it's different from what we've seen, you know? And so you want to respect your audience. You don't want to do all this work to market a book and then people get it and then they don't like it. And that just comes from just throwing things together. So don't throw anything together. Really think about it. I tell people all the time, sit down with your character, give it a backstory. Go for a walk with your characters. If it's you, go for a walk with a younger version of you. Talk about the things that you feel are important to put into the story, but don't throw anything together. Really work on it because you have the potential to write an amazing book. You have the potential to write an amazing inspirational book, autobiographical book, biographical book, self-help book, children's book, um, a prayer journal. You have the potential to write a really good book that your audience will be interested in. And if you take your time, you really develop that backstory, you really think about the things that can be considered the complexity of the story. If you do that, you will have an audience that will go with you on a very long journey. And so I'm going to check to see if you guys have any questions. Now's the time to ask your questions because we're at the 45-minute mark, and I want to make sure I get this last bit of information in here. And this has been great. I've been enjoying. If you've been enjoying this series, let me know. This to me is an opportunity just to give some game for people who really want to write a book. So if you have any questions, I am going to answer those questions in a few minutes. So the call to action that I have for you all is to think about the book that you want to write. Think about the book that you want to write. Think about the characters that need to be in it. And if it's autobiographical, think about the lead character. If you're writing your own story, think about the things that you've been through. Write a list of things down. Make sure that in that list, you have all of the important things that you really feel you need to share. And make sure that you are overall really taking your own deep dive. Take your own deep dive into the story. Make sure that you have all the information that you feel needs to be in the story. And I put the link there. If you want to have access to the replays, just sign up. It's $37. If you want to have access to the replays that we have now, you have access to that for 72 hours. But if you want to have lifetime access, you can just click the link and just purchase it. It's $37 for the lifetime. After the series is over, it is going to go up to the regular price. It'll first be $197, but it's going up to $597. And the reason why is because 6 hours of really sitting down and talking to you about step by step, chapter by chapter, story arc and all about what it is that a book needs and then how to market it after a pandemic. What is that worth to you? Anybody that's ever had a coach knows that coaches charge thousands of dollars for the information that they that they have. So I'm doing this because I know that this is going to help someone, and also I know that this is a good way to introduce people into writing a story without having the fear or take away the mystery of it, right? So let me see what the questions are. All right, so Patty says, how do you avoid giving it away in the introduction before chapter 1? All right, Patty. So give me an example. I'll read it again. Give me an example of giving what away before an introduction. Give me an example, and I'll circle back with that. Unless you're saying you don't want to give away too much in the introduction before chapter 1. Is that what you're saying? If that's so, let me know. All right. So I'll wait for you to circle back, Patty, and then I will go to April's question. She says, sometimes I'm concerned that I'm telling my story. If it involves others, I'm concerned. Can I change their names? Yes. Yes. And yes. A lot of times what happens is people change names. They change names to protect the guilty. It used to be to protect the innocent, but people change names to protect the guilty. So if you're changing the name, for the most part, the person knows it's them, because because if you're true to the story, they're gonna know it's them. But you're not giving that information away from the general public. People who know them and know you in the story, they know it's them. So they know that there's nothing you can do about that. But yes, you can change names. And sometimes people write stories like a novel. Even though it's their own story, they'll write it like a novel. And when they write it like a novel, you may not necessarily know it's them or know it's their story, right? All right. And then Patty, um, okay, so April, you said, I think it's taking me longer because I'm afraid of outing others. Honey, I get it. I get it. I get it. So sometimes that's why we write it like a novel, so that it'll seem like it's um, like fictional. It'll seem fictional if you write it in a novel form, right? All right. And then Patty said, I forgot what it's called, a forward. So a forward, excuse me, a forward of a book is someone who has some notoriety that gives their endorsement to the book. So a forward is not necessarily an introduction or even part of any of the chapters. A forward is just you having the opportunity to get someone. Let's say Les Brown does a forward for a book. So he's putting his stamp of approval on it, and then what he's doing is allowing his audience to say, "Hey, if Les put his stamp of approval on this book, then I'm going to buy it." And usually that's what a forward is. It's just a really high level endorsement, right? A high level endorsement. Um, so, Patty, I believe you're asking, how do you put information in the introduction without giving too much away? Well, the introduction can be a little excerpt of the overarching idea of what the book is about. Or you might pull out some information from a specific chapter and just give a little bit of an introduction. And it doesn't have to be more than 100, 150 words. So you're not really giving it away. There's much more to the story, but you're giving like a peek into what the story is about. So you can do that. Um, you can do that without feeling, without feeling like you're giving it all away. But the introduction, it doesn't have to be long. And a lot of times people ask other people to do an introduction just the way they ask them to do a forward. They might just give a little bit of information inside of that. So yeah. So guys, we are at the 51-minute mark, and we're almost at coming to a close, really. Does anybody have any other questions for me before we close out part 3? We made it to part 3. Yes, how to write a book and market it after a pandemic. Looking forward to that. Okay, so April says, do you recommend the person writing the forward have the same genre of a book they've written? No, not necessarily. If you feel like someone can give the book a good endorsement, and you respect them, that's just like people pay for endorsements, which are forwards. Like if you're writing a book, you might have Brian Tracy do it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same genre. No. And Middle says, how many pages should be on an autobiography? If it's your first book, I really wouldn't exceed 30, 40,000 words, because that can be laborious. If it's a book for adults, I would say between 20 and 30,000. 50 is a stretch, because what happens is sometimes people become disappointed or they get a little intimidated by the amount of words. But if you tell a good story, you may not even worry about the words. If you're telling a good story, trust me, people will buy the book. They will buy the book. So don't get caught up in the word count. You want to make sure that that you're telling a story that people want to read and want to know about. So I think that's really, really good. But yeah, I would dare even say don't go over 20,000 words sometimes, because a book that has about 100, 150 pages sometimes is just a good place to start. And then Patty, you're asking about pre-sales. How far in advance is appropriate? You can write a book this year and release it next year. It's just who's interested in buying the book. Have you created enough of a buildup about the book so that people will want to buy it? I've sold books that I haven't written, And by the time I wrote them, I had enough people interested in it. So it's really building up the interest. It's no different from Disney telling us about a movie that they're filming 2 years in advance. Now they have a reputation, so you're going to believe that they are going to release the book. The only challenge with sometimes telling people about a book that you haven't written is, what if you stop writing it? So pre-sales can happen. I could say, hey guys, tonight this is going to be a book. And many of you would purchase it. Matter of fact, I did write the book. I wrote the book about this. And so this is a book. And I wrote the book before I even did the series. So it's never too early to start selling a book, even if you haven't written it, if you have a good, strong release date. And that means even if you give yourself 6 months before, if you give yourself 6 months before you release it, that's okay, as long as you keep your word and you keep your word to the people that you are promising that the book is going to come. And I always do pre-sales. I always pre-sell a book. You can ask anybody that's ever worked with me. I tell them at least 30 days, even 45 days, because I know that the person is closer to finish. There's some people I wouldn't tell them to do pre-sales because I know that they are not really 100% sure about the time frame. And then there's other times where if you have a writer who's advanced and they have several books, they can tell you about a book that's coming 6 months from now, 8 months from now, 9 months from now. It just depends. There's no, there's nothing written in stone that you can't start to sell a book immediately when you have the idea, as long as you know you're going to be accountable for the information and make sure that you do get the book done and sell it. So you can do that. So, any more questions, guys? We're coming to the end. This has been awesome. We covered chapter 1 again, pulling it in. Chapter 2 with expounding on the story. Chapter 3, just changing it up, bringing some complexity in there. And these are some great questions that are here. If there's no more questions, I'm going to close it out for tonight. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to close it out for tonight. And guys, thank you so much for being here. I will be back here on Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for part four of this 6-part series. So we're getting there. I am still excited. Thank you so much for your great questions. If you want to reach out to me, you always can find me on Storytelling in 3D Academy on Facebook. I will answer your questions. I want to go on this journey with you. I want to make sure that you do finish that book, and I want to make sure that you feel good about it and that your audience is happy about the book that you wrote, because you know how they're happy? They're going to talk about it. They're going to talk about the book that you wrote. So guys, that is my time. Thank you so much. And thank you, I see April. Thank you, Queen Lakeisha, Queen Heather, Patty, Queen Patty. I see Middles. I see oh my goodness gracious. So, so there's a lot of you guys. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on StreamYard, I'm on YouTube. So you guys have 72 hours. Thank you so much for coming in, Tasha. Good to see you. But you guys are going to have access to this replay for 72 hours. But I would love for you just to grab the series. It's $37. It's not going to break the bank because it is going up. It's going up to what it should be costing for this kind of information. So stay tuned. We will be back. I will be back on Thursday. I said we, like there's other people here. I'll be back on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Share the link with someone. If you know there's someone who should be writing a book, but they haven't yet, share the link with them. Tell them to register for the replay so that they can get part 1, 2, and 3. And that way they can go on this journey and they can stop and start it anytime they want and have an opportunity to write that book. So this is Monique Lisa signing off from How to Write a Book and Market It After a Pandemic. Thank you guys for being here. Peace.